Do you want a piece that I'm cut off? The piece I cut off. Ask for the ancient paths, where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Circling and circling, whistle deep within, gently embracing life-giving power. You are circling and circling, wisdom deep within. We bring you reverence and prayer today. One wing wise heavenward, one wing flies earthward, one wing flies everywhere. You will embrace us, you will empower us. We bring you reverence and prayer today. Praise the Trinity, our life-giving music. She is creating all things. Life itself is giving birth, and she is an angel chorus praising, and the splendour of arcane mysteries, which are too difficult to understand. Also from her, true life springs for all. The hope goes round and the strength goes round, and the power goes round, and the love goes round, and hand, three in one in a circling dance, are embracing the rhythms of Gaia. This infuses the rainbow rhythm, the earth, the sky, and the deep abyss. All are entangled and all are creating the bloom of creation. For God, our God, is a welcoming God, and a strengthening God, an empowering God. And God, our God, is a vulnerable God, and weaving the warp of creation. As we dance in a cosmic circle, we play our part in the turning loom. None are outside of the dance of the Trinity, three in the oneness of Gaia. In the beginning, people prayed to the creatrix of life. At the very dawn of religion, God was a woman. Do you remember? The drum resonates in the cosmos, and all is retuned and restored. Sing us our own song, the song of the earth, the song of creation, the song of our birth, that exists in belonging to you and to me, to the stars and the mountains, the sky and the sea. God's fingers gently weaving within creation's heart will sometimes pull together, sometimes push apart. And so the failing patterns are carefully resewn in breaking and in mending. The love of God is shown. Soil, which we once saw as a homogeneous mass, is composed of structures within structures within structures within structures. Earthworms roots and fungi create clumps of soil glued together with the fibres and sticky chemicals that they make, called aggregates. Within these aggregates, tiny animals like mites and springtails create smaller clumps. Between these clusters are holes of different shapes and sizes. Around them are films of water and the complex chemicals released by plants and animals. Each of these clusters and voids and films has its own properties, creating millions of tiny niche that different species can exploit. Microbes create aggregates by sticking tiny particles together with the carbon-based polymers or cements that they excrete. In doing this, they stabilize the soil and assemble habitats for themselves. Over time, this process builds an ever more complex architecture, pores and passages through which water, oxygen and nutrients can pass. In other words, soil is like a wasp's nest or a beaver dam, a system built by living creatures to secure their survival. But unlike those simpler structures, it becomes an immeasurably intricate, endlessly ramifying catacomb created by bacteria, plants, and soil animals working together. We gaze into your fertile earth and see your creatures working, regeneration in the dirt, the Holy Spirit birthing, the soil is the human ground, society's foundation, the dark of God, a fire profound, the basis of creation. Hinge of silence, creak for us, rose of darkness, unfold for us, blue harebell, bend for us, moist fern, unfold for us, springy moss, uphold us, branch of pleasure, lean on us, leaves of delight, murmur for us, evening draws, evening dews, pearl for us, secret waterfall, pour for us, hidden cleft, speak to us, portal of delight, inflame us, hill of motherhood, wait for us, gate of birth, open for us. Angelo Foligno, while attending Mass one day and seeing the host elevated, exclaimed, "I beheld and comprehended the whole of creation, that is, what is on this side and what is beyond the sea. And my soul, in an excess of wonder, cried out, 'This world is pregnant with God.' Wherefore I understood how small is the whole of creation, that is, what is on this side and what is beyond the sea, the abyss, the sea itself, and everything else. The power of God fills it all to overflowing." There is an increasing awareness, not only among Christian theologians, but even more among ordinary believers, that if God is in fact the all-encompassing reality the Christian faith proclaims, then that reality is to be experienced in and through our actual lives as biological organisms who are persons, part of nature, and living in society. Did you know that trees talk? Did any of you know that? Well, they do. They talk to each other, and they'll talk to you if you'll listen. Trouble is, white people don't listen. They never learned to listen to the Indians, so I don't suppose they'll listen to other voices in nature. But I have learned a lot from trees. Sometimes about the weather, sometimes about animals, sometimes about the Great Spirit. I think that Western people who come into the Indian environment and attempt to preach take along their own set of categories and use it to deal with the Indian people they meet. Anthropologists, summarising what they find in the Indian tradition, always call us animists. And that view is accepted by a great many people in the field of religion. We are put in some cultural evolutionary framework, and then we're supposed to move from animism to some great abstract conception of God. Imagine an elephant in a room. This elephant is not a proverbial, weighty issue, but an actual, weighty mammal. Imagine the room is spacious enough to accommodate it. Make it a school gym. Now imagine a mouse has scurried in. A robin hops alongside it and an owl perches on an overhead beam. A bat hangs upside down from the ceiling and a rattlesnake slithers along the floor. A spider has begun to spin a web in a corner and a mosquito buzzes in the air. A bumblebee sits upon a potted sunflower. Finally, in the midst of this increasingly crowded hypothetical space, add a human. Let's call her Rebecca. Sorry, all the Becky's present. She's sighted, curious, and thankfully fond of animals. The elephant raises its trunk like a periscope. The rattlesnake flicks out its tongue, and the mosquito cuts through the air with its antennae. All three are smelling the space around them, taking in the floating scents. The elephant sniffs nothing of note. The rattlesnake detects the trail of the mouse and coils its body in ambush. The mosquito smells the alluring carbon dioxide on Rebecca's breath and the aroma of her skin. It lands on her arm, ready for a meal, and before it can bite, she swaps it away, and her slap disturbs the mouse. It squeaks an alarm at a pitch that is audible to the bat, but too high for the elephant to hear. The elephant, meanwhile, unleashes a deep, thunderous rumble, low-pitched, too low-pitched for the mouse's ears or the bat's, but felt by the vibration-sensitive belly of the rattlesnake. Rebecca, who is oblivious to both the ultrasonic mouse squeaks and the infrasonic elephant rumbles, listens instead to the robin, which is singing at a frequency better suited to her ears. But her hearing is too slow to pick up all the complexities that the bird encodes within its tune. The robin's chest looks red to Rebecca, but not to the elephant, whose eyes are limited to shades of blue and yellow. The bumblebee can't see red either, but is sensitive to the ultraviolet hues that lie beyond the opposite end of the rainbow. The sunflower it sits upon has at its centre an ultraviolet bullseye, which grabs the attention of both the bird and the bee. The bullseye is invisible to Rebecca, who thinks the flower is only yellow. Her eyes are the sharpest in the room. Unlike the elephant or the bee, she can spot the small spider sitting upon its web. But she stops seeing anything much once the lights go out. Plunged into darkness, Rebecca walks forward, arms outstretched, hoping to feel obstacles in her way. The mouse does the same, but with whiskers on its face, it sweeps them back and forward several times to make a map of the surroundings. As it skitters between Rebecca's feet, its footsteps are too faint for her to hear, but they are easily audible by the owl perched up on the beam overhead. The disc of stiff feathers on the owl's face funnels the sounds towards its sensitive ears, one of which is slightly higher than the other. Thanks to this asymmetry, the owl can pinpoint the source of the mouse's skittering in both the vertical and the horizontal planes. It swoops in just as the mouse blunders within the range of the waiting rattlesnake. Using two pits on its snout, the snake can sense the infrared radiation that emanates from warm objects. It effectively sees in heat, and the mouse's body blazes like a beacon. The snake strikes and collides with the swooping owl. As the bat feeds, the robin feels a familiar attraction that most of the other animals can't sense. The days are getting colder, and it is time to migrate to warmer southern climes. Even within the enclosed gym, the robin can feel Earth's magnetic field, and guided by its internal compass, it points due south and escapes through a window. It leaves behind one elephant, one bat, one bumblebee, one rattlesnake, one slightly ruffled owl, one extremely fortunate mouse, and one Rebecca. These 7 creatures share the same physical space, but experience it in wildly and wondrously different ways. The same is true for the billions of other animal species on the planet and the countless individuals within those species. Earth teems with sights and textures, sounds and vibrations, smells and tastes, electric and magnetic fields. But every animal can only tap into a small fraction of reality's fullness. Each is enclosed within its own unique sensory bubble, perceiving but a tiny sliver of an immense world. Deep in creation's heart an energy calls to us but leaves us free. Dance with that universal energy, celebrate life's mystery. Our Father, who fashioned the dew to tremble, the wind to stir, the sea to rise and fall, forgive us our trespasses as we roam these urban pastures. Our Father, who art in exile, hallowed once was your name, now cited in vain, the cause of sectarian murder. You have led us into temptation and left us unable to resist. 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 Unable to resist. 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 God is in my head and in my understanding. God is in my arms and in my lifting. God is in my hands and in my making. God is in my throat and in my singing. God is in my teeth and in my chewing. God is in my guts and in my flowing. God is in my loins and in my yearning. God is in my feet and in my walking. God is in my shape and in my beauty. The values of male honour and female shame and the opposition of public man and private woman had a profound influence on the way that Christian theologians came to view the sexual self and the body. Through their assimilation into Christian instigations such as asceticism, monasticism and clerical celibacy, sin and human nature, the values of the Greco-Roman world, shaped Western attitudes towards women, the body and sexuality for nearly 2,000 millennia. See these lines upon my face? They're a map where I've been. In the deep they are traced, a deeper life has settled in. How do we survive living out our lives? I wouldn't trade a line, make it smooth or fine, or pretend that time stands still. I want to rest my soul here, where it can grow without fear. Another line, another year. See these bruises, see these scars, hieroglyphs that tell the tale. You can read them in the dark, through your fingertips, like braille. One winter's day, I was going to the church of St. Nicholas. It was cold, and the frost was hanging like diamonds on the edge of the bushes. I pushed open the glass doors engraved beautifully of the church. As I did so, a small blue tit fell from the ceiling onto the hard, tiled floor. Upside down, its legs in the air, it looked troubled. My heart said, what can I do? So I picked it up. It was clearly near death. So I stroked its head gently to ease the soul over. There we were together, this tiny moment, on the edge of death. I laid it down beside me, prayed for the soul to pass over. And in front of me there appeared a figure, looking strange. Are you St. Nicholas? I said. No, said the figure. I am generosity. When a soul passes over in a loving relationship, generosity is born. When the first priest arrived, I said, here is a dead blue tit. He said, well, let's put him on the wall. The second priest said, must have lost its body heat. How could I have explained to them this magic, liminal moment when Bird and I were together in some beautiful, magical space? Our civilization represses any form of transcendence. Our normal adjusted state is too often the abdication of ecstasy, the betrayal of our true potentialities. An exception has been made in non-Western cultures, based on the belief that these experiences are culturally constructed and could only be normal in a culture that endorses and teaches it. During a quarter century documenting indigenous cultures, human rights photographer and filmmaker Phil Borges often saw these cultures identify psychotic symptoms as an indicator of shamanic potential. He was very intrigued by how differently psychosis is defined and treated in the West. The intuitive is so easily pathologized, rather than being seen as a healing strategy. We need to see them as salutogenic rather than pathogenic. I am holding you my hand. I am holding you in the hollow of my hand. I am holding you in the hollow of my hand. I am holding you in the hollow of my hand. I am holding you in the firmness and the mystery of the earth. I am holding you in the mystery of the earth. I am holding you in the mystery of the earth. I am holding you in the hollow of my hand. There you are. One way, presenting the old ways in a very different style from what I'm going to do now, which is present it more PowerPoint. Embodiment bits of the earth here. It's beautiful shamanic drum, which you'll see coming from the very north of Norway, from the northern cap of Europe, hit by a reindeer home with the skin of the reindeer. And also very fascinating here, the drawings on it. You have both the indigenous tradition with the trees and so on, but also, as we found out, didn't we, yesterday, little churches sort of integrated. So you saw the dilemma of these indigenous cultures when Christian missionaries came. Rather than reject them, they just tried to integrate them into their already existing schema. They had a very practical, solid, material view of God, and they were asked to give that up in favour of an abstraction. So, in a sense, the old ways, and what can we take from the old ways? How can we find the good bits? That's why I called it God in the circle, that the thing goes round and round. There's nothing new under the sun, and that's not depressing. It's just a way of seeing the old ways and how they're being reflected in new ways each time. Now I'm going to set you a little quiz, which I'll answer later on. Here's a sound. I'm going to ask you what you think that was. There'll be various of these from time to time, so that you can have a guessing game and think what it's the sound of. Here, I think, will be another one. There are some other sounds in that one. So, behold, I make all things new. Well, first of all, how are we going to get at the old? I was been looking, David, you referred to the Song of Songs yesterday, and I too have been looking at the Song of Songs. And I was talking to my wonderful Jewish friend about the Song of Songs, and she's just learning to read in the Hebrew. And she said, "What did you say?" I said, "Behold, the flowers appear upon the earth, and the time for the singing of birds has come," which many of you will know, one of the most famous lines. She said, "What did you just say it again?" She said, "Because we don't translate it like that." She said, "The way we translate is the buds appear on the earth and the time for singing has come." So that actually is rather tricky, rather different, because it's buds that are appearing, the potential's appearing, not the given flower. And the time, not for the singing of the birds, but for everyone. You've all got your own note. It's not the birds that you've got to leave it to. We've all got to sing. So the notion of seeing the Song of Songs as potentiality and so on, and how difficult it is to get from these ancient scriptures what they actually said by the time they've been translated 1,000,000 times by 1,000,000 people, all with their own sensory bubble that they live in and want to perpetuate, and so on. There's the voice of the turtle, and so on. And behold, I'm making all things new, and so on. The plan is the notion of cultural change and how it works, and then the notion of weaving, that we're continually weaving these things together in some way, and so on. Music and healing, embodiment, relationship, the visionary experience, music and the alternative reality. And in fact, all of those have been present in what I've just done, just looking at them in a different way, in a more, perhaps one would say, academic way, or what I think performance as research is as valid as any other way of doing research, and so on. So the stuff of creation, no one knows what music is. It is performed, listened to, composed, talked about, but its essential reality is as little understood as that of its cousin, electricity. We know it detaches the understanding, enabling thoughts to turn inward upon themselves and clarify. We know it releases the human spirit into some solitude of meditation, where the creative process can freely act. We know it can soothe pain, relieve anxiety, comfort distress, accelerate health, confirm courage, inspire clear and bold thinking, ennoble the will, refine taste, uplift the heart, stimulate the intellect, and do many other interesting and beautiful things. And yet, when all is said and done, no one knows what music is. Perhaps the explanation is that music is the very stuff of creation itself. And there we have the ecology that we know. So how does that rhythm run through all these habitats for the body, the environment, society, and the cosmos? We live in a vibrating universe, which quantum physics is actually telling us. And yet the power of harmonics, the ancient mystery traditions referring to the Egyptian gods, often Hermes, Trismegistus, and other origination made prize music. They describe how sound can be seen as the primary causative form of the universe. The principle of vibration, which is that all is vibration. The principle is rhythm, which is that everything flows. The principle of correspondence, which is as above, so below, can be seen to apply to musical phenomena. And so vibrations, in the very earliest part of time, have been seen as important. What is a human being, says Einstein? We are a slowed down sound and light wave, a walking bundle of frequencies, tuned into the cosmos. We are souls dressed in sacred biochemical garments, and our bodies are the instruments through which our souls play their music. Einstein writing considerably after Hildegard, but actually writing much the same as Hildegard, and so on. Kim Chance-Thomas's Imrat Khan, whom many of you know, wrote a great deal on the power of music coming through the Hindu traditions and so on. Animals, as we heard in that wonderful description from a new book that I would commend to you, which is on the bibliography, Yongs, and an immense wonder, showing how... and then, of course, indigenous traditions traditionally sat on the earth. There were no chairs. So you sat on the earth, you lay on the earth, and you actually listened to the vibrations of the earth, which told you whether there was an elephant coming or a mouse coming, and all of that. So that power of vibrations was of the vibrating of the earth. That's why you sat on it, because then you were in touch with a whole range of things vibrating on it, and so on and so forth. We lost that. We invented the chair, which meant that our feet are there, but of course our feet, as Gerald Manley Hopkins says, are often shod, so even they can't feel the vibration of the earth. And some of you will know that every morning I go out barefoot onto the earth for about 5 to 10 minutes, so that once a day my body is in contact with the earth in some way, grounding. And of course Christianity, as I said last year, will spend all its time looking upwards and not looking downwards and rooting itself in the earth. But how many of you, you've turned them all off, thank you so much, but how are we communicating now? How do you know? You've got a little vibrating machine in your pocket. So the vibrations are still alive and well. We're still using vibrations, not quite by lying on the earth, but the mobile phone is, of course, working on the basis of vibration. So how we see how those old patterns keep recurring in some way or other. And of course, one of the people that we know so well is Evelyn Glennie, you know, to the death, but always performing barefoot, because she's using exactly the old systems of the transmission of the sound, not through the ear, but through the vibrations of the body and the floor and so on. Over one, the Song of Songs. I've taken the Song of Songs because it is a fascinating book. It has really no coherent structure, has no coherent narrative. We don't quite know where it came from. It puts the fragments together in sometimes illogical patterns. It embraces many paradoxes. You've got sudden shifts of mood. We don't even know who's speaking. It's clearly embodiment. And one of its mysteries, of course, is there's no mention of God. Well, of course there is, because you don't need to mention God in the Song of Songs, because love is there everywhere. So you don't need the name God. All you need is the name love. And that's, in a sense, a given in the Song of Songs, and so on. It's a strange play. It could be a play. It's got characters, chorus of singers, referred to as the Daughters of Jerusalem, asking leading questions. It's got a Shulamite girl. It might have one man or it might have two men, a shepherd and maybe a king, but it looks as if it's earlier than that king to be Solomon. So, and so on. It may have been recited as a festival performance by a variety of voices. The truth is we don't know, and that he felt that it's a real collage. Hebrew scriptures draw on a variety of religious traditions. James Atwell, writing about the origin of Judaism, says it's simply mixing and matching from all that's going on. And what we see that most clearly in the Song of Songs. And there are remains of the Hieros Gamos, the sacred wedding, and of the rituals of Ishtar in Nana, the female god in Mesopotamia. It's a collection of fragments, similarities with Egyptian love poetry, Greek pastoral poets such as Theocritus, and still generating a huge amount of art. If you look on the internet, there's a massive amount of drawing, painting based on it. And I love this. A comparison can be made between the Song of Songs and the myth of the Garden of Eden in Genesis, whose preoccupation it shares, and of which it is an inversion, since it portrays paradise in this world, rediscovered through love. The song transforms the images and motifs of the story of the Garden of Eden, so it can be seen as a commentary on the Garden of Eden, a participant in the debate. But it shows the emergence of culture from nature and all those dilemmas. I'm just going to show not a great deal, although those of you interested in art, I'm not sure whether, Elaine, you know these incredible canvases of Chagall working on the Cantique de Cantiques, the mysteries of divine love. And he does very detailed, but I'm just showing them because you can see how in his painting it's basically a collage, just a collection of images put together in ways. We see there the woman in the tree structure, various birds and things around it. The young woman here alone is on a palm above the city of Jerusalem. David is near the throne, and so on. And you see all those, you've got images of birds and angels, and so on. And even Chagall himself is probably in the painting. But the set is very beautiful. Here we do see a man and woman together. We don't see that all the time. We see that. You can see how Chagall captures the collage-like structure of the Song of Songs. And we heard this. So in the Song of Songs, we have probably the most obvious remainder of the goddess traditions, not to be persecuted as in the stories of Baal and so on, and Asherah, but actually included in the tradition. The Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage. The celebrations of fertility in agricultural communities, such as Mesopotamia, Phoenicia, Egypt and Canaan, the sacred union between earth and spirit. It consisted of an exchange of gifts, a sacrifice of grains and fruits, sometimes livestock, and a feast and secret intercourse nocturnally. It was not about, and I don't think despite all of the interpretations so common that this is about marriage. There's nothing about marriage in the Song of Songs at all. It's actually about love. And if you take it back to the hieros gamos, that was not a tradition of being in love. It was a ritual act to show how fertility is achieved. It's done very, very different from our conception of marriage. Remember, our own conception of marriage is about as old as the Victorian period, not much older than that. And so the song may well refer back to much older traditions. There is, in fact, despite what people have written, no intercourse in the Song of Songs at all. There's a celebration of the body, but there's nothing else. People have sort of implied that there is, because they usually go back to metaphor and allegory. They said, instead of taking the actual plants and things as plants, they said these are allegories for intercourse. Well, there's no indication that they're allegories. Why can't they just be plants and animals which are part of God's loving, not an allegory for sexual intercourse? So the way in which people's perspective, and I would say, being rather cruel, I think, Victorian prudishness combined with a sort of voyeurism, I would describe many of the commentaries on the songs. So there we have the goddess traditions, the natural world, diversity of life. Her body is nature, many names and images of her. But a book that influenced me a great deal, which again is on your list, is Jesus and the Goddess. I believe Jesus would be sufficiently concerned about the spirituality of gender and the earth, and about resisting the imbalances of mainstream religion. I believe that Jesus was a radical in his day, and if he came today, he would be just as radical. Mahatma Gandhi once made a wry observation about Christianity, suggesting he thought it was a great idea, and he hoped someday someone would try it. So, the first theme is obviously the environment and so on, and we see various approaches to it there. And this is Mary Gray writing, the Psyche and Eros myth, a myth of Europe split at the roots. Psyche still wandering around looking for Eros, in the polarising of the body and soul of animals over and against humans and humanity, over and against the earth, and in even more than that, being superior to it. The remythologisation of postmodern science's understanding of the origins of the evolving universe, the earth. And there we see the notion of the entire cosmos, with people like Thomas Berry, Mary Gray, and Primavesi looking at the re-enchanting. And here we see the distressing images of God and the earth, which many of us are familiar with. You know, God just about managing to touch the earth on the roof of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. I mean, how can that be when God, the whole of the earth is filled with God, and so on. And you see all these majestic images of one kind or another. So the disaster of these monarchical models, which marginalise the material world. God is not far off in another place, a king looking down, as it were, on his realm, but here is a visible presence. The world is the bodily presence, a sacrament of an invisible God. God is being itself, restoring an incarnational view that the first incarnation of God was the creation. Embodiment of human beings in relation to the earth and other Gaian beings. A process model in which I tried to show you with this that God is continually weaving, reweaving, pulling apart, putting it back together. So it's a process model and so on. The earth is not yielding submissively to the religio-politico-economic schematisms of what we call anthropic exceptionalism. Earth names do not matter beneath us, not space lines static beneath time, but the teeming sphere, that's the soil of activity. Yes, the notion that I explored from the wonderful, again, the latest book of Georges Monbiot called Regenesis, that the soil is actually a vibrating mass of catacombs. I love that description, that it's like a catacomb with all these little tiny bits. You know, in my father's house are many mansions. I thought let's rewrite that, shall we? All these little mansions in the soil constantly. It reminds me of when I was a child and used to look in the fire, and you had all these lovely little houses, and they formed and then they collapsed and then another one appeared and so on. And I thought that's the closest I got, but I never related it to the soil. And in fact, Monbiot is very critical of fertilizers and farming and so on, saying that by doing that, we're actually de-enlivening the soil in some way, not allowing that process to go on. And the Reformation, again, Reformation's had a bit of attack, really. A high position of the human being in a very dangerous hierarchy, and you saw in that wonderful thing from Immense Wonder how all the creatures are perceiving and have consciousness of some way, but it's very different from ours. I mean, it's not a lesser version of ours, it's a whole different way of perceiving the world. And this led to the pernicious individualism of contemporary secular culture. So we lost the sense of relationship. So Mother God, the Sophia of the Hebrew tradition, the embodied Jesus, leads the universe to a new understanding and renewal. Eschatology is not the end game, but the generation of new possibilities. As some of you know from the song that we usually sing at New Year, sacred endings and beginnings, and so on. Now, I wanted to show you this, because my wonderful Jewish friend, and we talk quite often, she said that the Jewish women are trying to find the Jewish goddess traditions. This is the Kohenet meeting. They are the Jewish women priestesses working to find the Jewish goddess. And some of you who were present in the women's gatherings before women were ordained will see that they're using drums, they're out in the forest.
We are Kohenet.
We are Hebrew priestesses.
We celebrate the sacred
In the body, the earth,
and the cosmos.
We hold the world
to be an embodiment of Shekhinah.
The divine presence.
We reclaim the traditions of women.
From the priestesses and prophetesses of biblical time
To healers, dreamers, and seekers throughout Jewish tradition.
We create ritual as a transformative force,
in Jewish and human life.
we practice spiritual leadership.
as an act of holding sacred space, time, and soul.
We honor divinity as she appears to us
In female forms. Through our traditions, imaginings,
prayers, dreams,
Ancestors and teachers.
We are a clergy training program.
A sisterhood.
and a movement, changing the face of Jewish leadership.
We need you, priestessing.
We need you, priestess.
As she shines her face, may we embody grace, may she bless us, and may she...
When we were doing that. But now they've set up a whole training school for priestesses in the Jewish goddesses. So it's a whole new movement within Judaism, which links with these biological words which are coming around: zoopsychism, biopsychism, and panpsychism. Haeckel in the late 19th century started looking at this real soul life, that everything has a soul life. Modern physics was founded on the separation of mind and matter. That goes back to Galileo Galilei, whose big idea some 4 centuries ago was to boil the world down into moving objects that could be described by mathematical laws. Our sense, meanwhile, live in the human soul, distinct though still important. It follows that consciousness will somehow emerge out of all particles, strings, information, and whatever you take as fundamental. So all nature is conscious. It's not just a product of human beings. Panpsychism is that the ideas are emerging in the fields of cosmology, astrophysics, evolutionary biology, molecular biology, and ecology. Process thought has helped this. And you heard this beautiful part from Evans, who was a professor in Durham. A human and a seagull and the fish and the worm, each of them equipped to perceive the world in ways that I am not. The world supports the irreconcilable receptions of us all, fish, peoples, birds and people. That the world supports all of these experiences simultaneously, and for each experiencer exclusively, shows that none of us has, nor could have, even in principle, any more than a minutely partial experience of the world. And I'm afraid, that the church has preached the superiority of human beings. And of course we've got a whole consciousness that only human beings are conscious. How do we know that? It may be true, but it may not be true. How do we know that there isn't a consciousness in the robin, in the rattlesnake, and the elephant of that? So, and that is a movement penetrating a great deal of those formerly scientific worlds in what's called panpsychism. Biopsychism concentrates on not just animals, but every organic being, every autopoietic cell is conscious. Consciousness is an awareness of the outside world, and so on. Even in the case of bacteria, that the bacteria are aware. And the tardigrade, who my friend Carolyn Bolter introduced me to, is only a single cell, and they've been living in my water butt for years, so I never even knew they were there. But they're extraordinarily able to adapt and change and so on. So how is that not consciousness? This is a marvellous paper feeding into this. What is it like to be a bat? Yeah. We all believe that bats have experience, after all, they're mammals. Bats present a range of activity and a sensory apparatus so different from ours. Anyone who's spent some time in a closed space with an excited bat knows what it is to encounter a fundamentally alien form of life. We know that most bats perceive the external world primarily by sonar or echolocation, and detecting the reflections from objects within range and so on and so forth. This appears to create difficulties for the notion of what it is like to be a bat. And so on. It's a very interesting paper, What is it like to be a bat? And he deals a lot in what's called Umwelt. The Umwelt is the surroundings that surround us, and we saw in that wonderful story, the way the Umwelt of the rattlesnake is very different from the Umwelt of Rebecca, very different from the Umwelt of the spider. So each of us has an Umwelt in which we can perceive things. Organisms have different Umwelten, even though they share the same environment. So they're all a gym, but the way they perceive what a gym is profoundly different. Perceptual features give them a model, where to shelter, threats, navigation. Mind and the world are inseparable. Their mind interprets the world for the organism. And that Aristotle got it wrong. There are many, 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 many more than 5 senses, a vast range of senses. Organisms perceiving a huge variety. Language, which we concentrate on, but language is a blessing and a curse. We depend so much now on words that it's very difficult for us to perceive what the world is like for those people who haven't got words like we have. So there's an interdependence. And this is really revisiting the 4 humours of the medieval world. That the world is made up of fire, earth, air and water, and so on, hot, dry, wet and cold, and that, each of us is probably primarily either hot or fire. There's a mixture, but we'll have one. And that, a rainy day for a fiery person is dreadful, because water puts out the fire. But a rainy day for a wet person is wonderful, they're in their own environment. So Hildegard, prescribing, would say, first of all, you've got to look at the person, and you've got to look at whether it's raining or whether it's sunny. And then you can do your prescribing for your kelp or whatever you're going to do. So a much more holistic view and an environmental view and so on. So rediscovering earthy sounds. The great animal orchestra, the way in which human beings have blotted out the geophony and the biophony of the natural world. Increasing anthrophony and anthrorhythm. Now, what did you think those sounds were at the beginning? Sorry?
Fungi.
Yes, you're very close. They were plants. The sound of the plants. Here is the machine that was doing it. There. That machine, you see the small computer next door to the plant, linked up to the plant by a little connected to the plant, connected also. So one goes into the soil, one goes on the leaf of the plant, and it's transferred into slat sounds. This one is a great hyacinth. So now in my music house at the bottom of the garden, a harpist and a guitar player and me on the drum gather together. We link up to the yew tree outside and we improvise together. Now, the indigenous people didn't have those electronic devices. In a sense, we're using exactly the same, but he called himself an Indian, as an indigenous US, North American. They were listening to the plants. You see how that idea is coming around, but now using digital equipment and so on. It's a whole interesting ball game. But Charles Darwin had it in his thinking, the power of movement in plants, that plants are moving. And the machine comes from a community of Damanhur in Turin, in Italy. And there we hear, this is a solo Pelargonium. See, it's different. So I've got lots of them there. This is my favourite because that's the yew tree at the entrance to the music house. And this is my birthday card from my friends who have borrowed it. It's my birthday card. It's a cactus, not quite a fungi, but a cactus. So, the sound of the plants. I'm not going to do these in detail. What happened with music and healing was that once upon a time, of course, the shamans used music and healing, but how do we use music and healing now? We saw the invention of music therapy, which is rediscovering the power of music and healing, and so on. We see John Tavener writing about heartsease. That the main purpose of music is heartsease. And there we see the shaman's drum. And the shamans used music to heal. They used music for rites of passage, death rituals, initiation rituals, and so on. And the drum in that tradition is regarded not simply as an instrument, but as a person playing out. This is a person, and you have different drums. I've got There's only one of two that I have, but my shamanic friend has a whole range of them, and she chooses the one she thinks is right for that particular healing, much in the same way as I suspect, David, you have done with pharmacology. You have to choose the right drum for the right healing. It isn't just a drum, it's a person with a character, and that has to relate to the character of the person that you're playing it for, and so on. In fact, the book that we're writing, Shaman writes about, my friend the drummer, and I said, I think you must write an opening paragraph, because most people in Western society won't be used to talking about drums in this way. And living creatures share an energetic bond with which they can influence each other's health. That resonant bonding might explain the placebo effect. And so that notion that the energetic bond may well be music in some way or other. But the New Age, of course, has rediscovered a lot of these. But the Church, of course, has been traditionally resistant to the New Age in all its manifestations. But in many ways, what you see is a rediscovery of ancient wisdoms and practices, and so on, and holistic therapies. You see group music therapy emerging. And you see remarkable things. This is two GPs, they've retired now, from India, and they built a Gurukul, the Arts for Health project, next to their surgery. So they referred clients from their GP consultancy to go and learn some of the instruments there. It's regarded as eccentric now, but it's emerging, and so on, the Arts for Health project. But we're seeing it emerging now with social prescribing. Wandsworth has just put £350,000 into social prescribing, and we're starting to look at that. We have a meeting in the church, the Heart Lung Choir from St George's Hospital, so the consultants are referring people with heart and lung to the choir, and they're meeting now in the church. I see that part of the church's ministry of healing. And this again, Spinkter, one of the German doctors who believed that the rhythmic components of music, he was using that to reduce pain and reduce the various parts of the pharmaceutical industry, really. The other thing, I heard you use this word yesterday, Elizabeth, recovery, the lost art of convalescence, which would include things like music and air and so on. The picture at the bottom, I love. That some of you may, does anybody know that picture? South Coast, too far from here. It's the sea bathing hospital at Margate. This on the coast is still there, and if you were ill and there were no pharmaceutical products, they sent you down there and you had open windows and the sound of the sea, and it was regarded as healing. But we've lost any sense in health now of convalescence. When I was a child, we had convalescent homes. My grandma was in one, and so on. So we assume that people are ill and then they get better, and within 3 days they're better and they go out. I mean, what madness was that? They need that gentle move. Anyway, that's another bit. The use of the lullaby to calm people, and so on, you see it. A lullaby for dying as well as for living. Singing in hospitals, a little of it there. You see some of the examples of nurses singing. And here's from one of our books, Brian Castle, saying that he was being cared for by Filipino nurses, who were absolutely amazed that our nurses weren't singing. Because in the Philippines they did. That, you know, neighbouring bed being tended, but they were helping him. They began naturally, spontaneously, and quietly singing a Filipino song because the man was distressed. I mean, how sensible. You know, a lullaby to calm people down. She told me she had trained as a nurse in the UK, but singing as a form of therapy was not in the curriculum. What a pity, I commented. And there are arts programmes. This is one of the ones we evaluated in Salisbury Hospital. And then the notion of grief and the way that that can be dealt with by means of singing. This was the loss of her husband. And then she says, it took me 5 years to wake up, as my therapist called it. I learned that creative activities of playing piano, singing transformative music, creating cathartic poems, combination with spiritual disciplines, contemplating and attending church choir. I must admit, I was in the Marsden, and my friend was making these sounds, which we're familiar with when the language is lost. Instead of treating them as her being in pain, I treated them as musical sounds. So I went, and we had a wonderful conversation. Why did it mean that we were in pain? It's just the loss of words. And I felt so much that the music could bring what of Ianthe was left, alive still. It seems to me that at a certain point when you lose words, you stop being you. We're so dependent on them that we can't understand that sounds are means of communication. I have no doubt that if Hildegard and Julian were alive today, they'd be in long-stay psychiatric hospitals. Because we can no longer see those visions as salutogenic. And we see psychosis and spiritual awakening developing the spiritual crisis network. Thank you for your attention, and so on and so forth.